The horse was tired, ribs sharp beneath patchy fur, its eyes dull and sunken. No one bid on it, not even for meat. But the wagon it came with, weathered but sturdy, stood out in the corral like a ghost from another time. He didn't need the wagon. He needed a horse. Still, something about the silence around it, the way the seller wouldn't meet his eyes, made him raise his hand. He paid in silver. No questions. He rode it home slow, trailing the wagon behind. Dust kicked up under the wheels. The sun began to set. Halfway through the canyon pass, he heard it, a muffled cough. Then a tiny voice, barely more than a whisper. Then the creak of boards shifting from inside the wagon. When he pulled back the tarp, 6 pairs of eyes stared up at him, wide, afraid, and silent. A mother. 5 children. Hiding in the wagon he just bought. Under the harsh noonday sun, the auction yard buzzed with the usual sounds of cattle bawling, hammers ringing against iron, and the flat bark of numbers being shouted by a red-faced man standing atop a crate. The dust curled and clung to the air like memory, settling on everything: faces, boots, hats, thoughts. Most of the crowd had gathered around the younger stock, eyeing colts with bright eyes and strong legs. Wagons stood further out, neglected, sun-bleached and tired, their worth measured not by years left, but by the time it would take to dismantle them for firewood. One of them, a low-riding, canvas-covered wagon with weathered wheels and a sagging frame, sat at the very edge, half swallowed by weeds. The horse tethered beside it looked worse. Its coat was patchy, with sores beneath the hair and bones that showed sharp angles where muscle should have been. It kept its head down, barely flicking at flies. No one paid it much mind. Even the auctioneer skipped it, muttering something about damaged stock before moving to the next lot. The owner, a hunched man with a tobacco-stained beard and the smell of something rotten about him, stood with arms crossed, chewing the inside of his lip like he knew what sat under the canvas but had decided long ago not to care. The cowboy had come for a horse, nothing more. He wasn't one to waste money on junk, but something about that quiet wagon with its drawn canvas and the way no one would meet its eye tugged at him. He didn't flinch when he saw the animal. He'd patched worse. His gaze kept returning to the wagon, though, how the bolts on one side were cleaner than the others, how the canvas had been re-sewn at the bottom edge, how it looked like it had been tampered with but also carefully hidden. Like something had tried to erase a story but hadn't done a good job of it. When the auctioneer finally circled back and asked for any takers, half joking, half daring, no hands went up. Except one. The cowboy's. He didn't barter. He paid in full, coins clinking one by one into a greasy palm. No one asked why. They never did with him. Some men just had silence wrapped around them like a second coat. He untied the horse, hitched it to the wagon without much ceremony, and led it from the yard while eyes followed but mouth stayed shut. He didn't look back. The road home wasn't short. It curved through gullies and dips, under cottonwoods and across dry creek beds. The wheels creaked with every turn and the harness made a pitiful sound whenever the horse stumbled. The sun began its descent, pulling gold and copper across the sky. He didn't speak, didn't whistle, just rode with one hand on the reins and the other resting on his thigh. Halfway through a narrow canyon pass where the wind whistled differently and shadows moved slower, he heard it. At first, it could have been the wagon settling. Then the creak again. Then a cough, so faint it might have been the wind in the tarp. Then a breath that didn't belong to the horse or to him. His body stilled. The reins slackened. His head turned slowly. The wagon behind him shifted, but not from the road. He stepped down, boots sinking into the dust. The canyon around him was quiet, save for the rustling of dry leaves high above. The tarp covering the wagon fluttered once, like breath. He approached carefully, not with suspicion, but with the weight of someone who's seen too many things hidden behind too many doors. He pulled the canvas back. Inside, huddled in the darkness, were eyes. 6 of them. A woman, her cheeks hollow and eyes sharp with hunger and fear. 2 children to either side, younger than 10. One child asleep, his face flushed. Another with arms around his knees, rocking gently. The last, a girl, maybe 5, holding a cloth to her mouth as if silence could still save them. No one moved. For a long breath, they stared at one another. Then the tarp slipped from his hand and fell back into place, and the canyon held its breath with them. The sun sank another inch. The sky deepened. He didn't speak. He didn't ask. He simply turned, untied the reins, and led the wagon forward again, slowly, steadily, as if nothing had changed. But something had. The air behind him had grown heavier, like a story was crawling out from the shadows and asking to be heard. and the wagon creaked on through the dusk, carrying more than it had before. The road narrowed as it wound deeper into the high country where the cottonwoods gave way to juniper and the hills rose in slow, thoughtful folds. The wagon creaked beneath its load, but the cowboy made no move to rush the pace. Dust rose behind the wheels in lazy spirals, dissolving into the cool air as evening settled. In the shadows of the pass, birds had gone quiet, and the hush of approaching twilight stretched long between hoofbeats. The horse labored on, head low, every step measured. The weight behind it was more than it had pulled in a long time, not just wood and nails, but the weight of breath, of bodies trying not to be heard. He hadn't looked back since lowering the canvas. He hadn't spoken a word since the coin left his hand at the auction. But his posture had changed. The loose ease in his shoulders had drawn inward. His hand rested closer to his sidearm. Not out of threat, but readiness. He knew what it meant when people had to hide like that. It never came from nothing. And it never came alone. When they broke free of the canyon, the land opened wide and flat, the sky yawning above them in bands of purple and burnt orange. His ranch sat a few miles farther, tucked behind a low ridge, shielded by scrub and distance. A lonely shape against the sky, unassuming and plain. Nothing out there would draw attention. He liked it that way. Had built it that way. The wagon reached the ridge as the last light fell. He dismounted, walking ahead now, guiding the horse more gently, less as a driver and more like someone showing the way. Behind him, the figures beneath the tarp had not stirred again. Still shadows. Still silent. He wondered how long they'd been back there. How long they'd gone without water, or food, or words. There were layers to that kind of quiet, first survival, then shame, then a silence so deep it swallowed your name. The cabin came into view just as the first star blinked through the dusk. It was small, square, and solid, with a split-rail fence and a corral half fallen in at the side. Smoke did not curl from the chimney yet. The ground around it was hard, cracked with the memory of rain that never came, but the well still held. He had made sure of that. Everything else was plain tools left where they last lay, firewood stacked unevenly against the wall, a rusted tin cup hanging on a nail by the door. He led the wagon to the rear of the house and stopped. The tarp fluttered once in the breeze, then stilled. He stood a moment, letting his presence register. Then he stepped away. Not toward the house. Not toward them. Just to the side where the well stood. He lowered the bucket slowly, the creak of the rope loud in the stillness. When the bucket hit water, the sound echoed up like a whisper too loud to ignore. He set out the water, then food, bread, hard cheese, and 2 apples, bruised but whole. He did not hand it to them. He placed it on a stump nearby and stepped away. The message was simple: it's here if you need it. Take it when you're ready. He disappeared into the cabin as the sky deepened into night. The house inside was as sparse as the land around it. A bed in one corner, clean and low. A stove that hadn't been fired in days. A table with 1 chair. A coat hung on a peg beside the door. It was a space made for solitude. Not built out of bitterness, but practicality. The kind of place where a man didn't ask for more than what he could carry on his back or hold in one hand. He lit the lantern, the flame casting flickering light across the room, warming the wood and making the shadows dance. He moved with quiet purpose, as if his hands remembered a rhythm his heart had long forgotten. He didn't look to the window. He didn't listen for steps. He just moved through the house like it was enough to simply make space. Outside, the night passed slowly. Coyotes called in the distance. The wind picked up just enough to rustle the trees. At some point in the dark, the food was taken. Quietly, without a sound. Just enough to leave a trace. The edge of a heel in the dirt, a torn piece of linen near the bread. He noticed it in the morning but didn't remark. He simply replenished the bucket, added more bread, and left a small bar of soap near the water. That day he tended the fence, splitting planks and setting nails. He worked with his back to the house, not as a gesture of trust, but as a statement. You are not being watched. He didn't enter the wagon. He didn't ask questions. He just kept building the fence, pausing only to sip water and check the sky. At dusk, smoke rose from the far side of the wagon, a small, careful fire. Nothing that would draw eyes, but enough to cook. He left a tin pot and some beans by the well, covered against the dust. The next morning, the pot was returned, washed. By the 4th day, Footprints began to show near the edge of the yard. Small ones, hesitant and close together. Children's steps. He saw them and made no sign. But that evening, when he brought in kindling, he left 6 small bundles beside the stump, each with a clean cloth, a bit of jerky, and a flat stone from the nearby creek, smooth by water, cool to the touch. Tokens, maybe, or anchors. He did not see their faces. Not yet. But the land around the house felt different. Less hollow, less waiting, and still the wagon stayed shut, holding its silence, holding them, but no longer hiding. Under the late summer sky, the days stretched long and dry. The land cracked in wide, dusty veins, and the air trembled over the flat stones that lined the trail leading up to the house. Time passed in the slow rhythm of tasks repeated. Feed the horse, mend the saddle, check the well, stack the firewood. The man moved through these routines with the same calm precision as ever, never in haste, never lingering too long. But beneath the quiet of his actions, something had shifted. Each morning he would leave supplies, sometimes folded clothes, sometimes potatoes from the cellar, sometimes a tin of salve left on a rock with a strip of cloth beside it. And each time the items disappeared. No sound, no words exchanged, but signs of life in the smallest details. The pot returned cleaner than he'd left it. A horseshoe he'd left behind the wagon one evening was mended, not with wire or rusted nails, but with care, as though someone inside remembered the craft. The children's steps had multiplied now, smaller prints branching out like cautious questions across the dust near the edge of the vegetable patch, around the side of the well, even toward the porch where his boots rested on the mat. One morning, a stone figure sat by his door, carefully stacked pebbles, 2 eyes etched with coal, a smile that curved just slightly. He didn't touch it. He only looked at it for a while and then stepped over it as he entered the house. That evening, he left a piece of chalk by the same doorstep. The next morning, the smile on the stone man had grown wider. He had lived alone for years, not counting his horse, not counting the land. People had become echoes in his mind, not presences. The war had taken his taste for crowds, and what it left behind had little need for laughter. But now, without anyone crossing the threshold of his home, the silence around it was thinning. The wagon remained closed, its canvas curtain like a skin that hadn't yet decided to heal or harden. But inside it there was breath, motion, quiet survival. By the 5th morning, he began setting up the second table outside the house. It was old, would split at the corners, nails rusted from years in the barn, but still usable. He wiped it down with a damp cloth, set 6 mismatched bowls atop it, and placed a bucket of water at the edge. He didn't linger. He didn't look. Just left it under the shade of a scraggly mesquite tree, then returned to the barn to fix a broken hinge. The sun rose higher, pushing shadows inward. The land smelled of dry grass and worn leather. From the corner of his eye, he saw a flicker of motion. A shape, small, swift, dark-haired, darted from behind the wagon, approached the table, and vanished again. Later, 2 shapes, then 3. By nightfall, the bowls had been used. One had a dent from being dropped. Another had a faint fingerprint in the dust that clung to its rim. Still no faces. Still no voices. But on the 6th night, a blanket appeared on his porch rail. Not his. Worn, hand-stitched in places, faded roses along the edge. Folded neatly, set carefully, as if left not to claim space but to acknowledge it. He didn't move it for hours. When he finally took it inside, he folded it again and placed it in the empty rocking chair beside the hearth. It stayed there, untouched, as the fire crackled low into the bones of the night. As the days continued, so did the pattern. The children came further now, not just to the edge of the fence but into the yard itself. Once, he found a wooden figure carved with rough care, 2 notches for eyes, a crooked smile. Another time, a small rag doll with 1 button eye, sitting upright near the chicken coop, watching the hens. The woman remained unseen, but her presence lingered in the way the wagon seemed to breathe more easily, its tarp now tied back slightly at the corner. Sometimes, when he passed close, he heard the soft rustle of cloth, the almost silent lull of a child's breath being calmed. He didn't press. He didn't ask. One night, as the sky burned down to ash, he found a loaf of bread by the door. Fresh, still warm, imperfectly shaped but dense and honest. The crust had cracked just slightly, and when he broke it open, steam curled out like a whisper in the chill. He ate it slowly, each bite anchoring him to the moment. And in that moment, he realized something had changed in the space between them. They were still strangers, still shadows to each other. But not secrets. Not anymore. Not threats. The land around the house no longer felt like it was bracing for silence. Felt like it was waiting for breath, for sound, for story. And the wagon, though it remained where it was, now belonged to the rhythm of the place. As though it had never been brought there by accident, but had returned after a long journey to the only place left that might still say, "You're safe. You're home." Under a sky laced with faint morning clouds, the ranch stirred quietly to life. The rooster had long since stopped crowing. It had grown used to the stillness, as had the man who walked his usual path past the shed and out toward the fencing line. His boots thudded gently over hardened earth, each step leaving behind a shallow print in the dust. The wind carried the faint scent of mesquite and ash, a memory of last night's fire that had burned down low beside the wagon. Though he hadn't seen it lit, he had found the faint circle of warm stones and the soft traces of soot where a small flame must have flickered after dark. The wagon's flap no longer hung tight. It had shifted slightly, either by wind or by intent. Through the gap, the edge of a blanket could be seen, a corner frayed, mended in 2 colors of thread. Nothing more. No faces, no words. But there was something different in the air around the yard that morning. A quiet that wasn't built on fear, but on pause, on consideration. He fed the animals, checked the troughs, and hauled water without once turning to look directly toward the wagon. That had become their unspoken ritual, each of them aware, neither one intruding. Yet as the day stretched into its long golden middle, the tension that once clung to the dry air began to unravel. The land itself seemed to hold its breath a little softer. Near midday, he laid a second stack of firewood near the side of the wagon, not close enough to press, but close enough to acknowledge. Alongside it, he set down a small jar of honey wrapped in cloth, the lid fastened with wire. A quiet offering, simple and unassuming. When he returned hours later, both were gone. In their place, a folded piece of brown paper sat tucked under a stone. The paper bore no words, just a pressed wildflower, purple and white, edges crumbling slightly from age or sun. That night, something else changed. From the cabin, he saw the faintest flicker of motion in the yard. A shape crossed from the far side of the wagon to the edge of the fence, small, upright, fast. A child. He didn't step outside. He simply sat near the window, the lantern turned low, letting the stillness remain. Minutes passed. Then a second shape, a little slower, followed the first. Then 2 more, hand in hand. They were exploring. Not wildly, not recklessly. Carefully. As if testing whether the space would bend or break around them. By the time the moon had lifted fully into view, they were gone again, back into the shelter of the wagon. But the prints remained in the dirt the next morning, light steps that trailed like birdsong in the earth. He didn't sweep them away. He worked around them. Later that afternoon, he was fixing the corral gate when he heard it. A sound. Not a word. Not even a cry. Just the hushed echo of laughter, short, quick, caught in a throat before it could rise. A child's laugh. And then silence again, as if someone had been startled into remembering they were supposed to be invisible. He looked up, just briefly, toward the wagon. Still, closed, but not closed off. That evening, he walked a little slower past their shelter, letting his boots scuff the ground just loud enough to be heard. A few feet past the back wheel, he dropped something, accidentally or not. A leather pouch, soft and worn, filled with dried apples and crushed nuts. He didn't turn back for it, didn't pause. The next day it was gone. What was left in its place was unexpected. A strip of cloth, hand-dyed, patterned in a way he didn't recognize, geometric and curved, dyed in rust and ochre. It had been folded and placed in the center of a smooth, flat stone, like an emblem or message. He studied it, not with suspicion but with reverence. It meant they saw him, not just as a shape that walked and worked nearby, but as a man. Presence. A decision. The fence was nearly finished now. Boards nailed clean, knots tightened, lines run straight. He had built it slow, not for speed but for rhythm. The kind of rhythm that steadied hands, calmed breath. The kind that invited silence to fill the space without fear. And behind him, the wagon door creaked open. Not all the way, not with flourish, but enough. From the corner of his eye, he saw a face. A child. Just one. Eyes wide. Hair dark and tangled. A solemn mouth. No fear there, only alertness, like a deer stepping onto unfamiliar soil. The child didn't speak, only watched. He met the gaze for a brief moment, then looked away, continuing to drive a nail into wood with deliberate slowness. The fence didn't need another board there, but he hammered anyway, giving the moment space to exist without collapse. When he looked again, the face was gone, but the door remained ajar. That night, the blanket that had once covered the wagon flap was folded and left at the porch. It smelled faintly of pine and smoke. He brought it in, spread it over the back of the chair beside the fire, and sat. Not to think, not to plan, just to sit, because something had shifted in the silence. It no longer asked for distance. It asked for listening. The wind had shifted again, carrying with it a deeper chill that crept across the land like an omen. Though the sun still glowed above the canyon ridge, its warmth felt distant now, as if it had somewhere else to be. The man woke before the first light touched the peaks and moved through the morning with the same quiet steadiness as always. But today there was something heavier in the air. He noticed it in the animals, restless in their pens, in the low drone of the wind that never seemed to pause, and in the quiet absence around the wagon, too quiet, as though breath had been held too long. He didn't go to the wagon. Not right away. He went about his chores like a man trying not to notice that something had changed. But change always made itself known in time. It began with the bowl, one of the old tin ones he had left by the porch with stew the night before. It was still there this morning, untouched. The cloth he'd wrapped around it was stiff with frost. He stared at it a moment longer than needed, then took it inside. The stew had congealed into a dull mass, the surface broken where some creature, perhaps not human, had dipped a paw into it. He walked to the edge of the porch and looked toward the wagon. Still and sealed. No flutter of curtain. No flicker of movement. The prints that had once danced around it were fading, swallowed by the cold. By midday, the wind had turned sharp. It scraped through the brush like knives, lifting dust and brittle leaves into the air. He moved slowly now, not because of age or fatigue, but caution. He gathered a bundle of extra firewood and a bucket of well water and carried them toward the wagon. When he reached the rear wheel, he paused. Then he crouched, set the items down gently, and rose again. Only then did he call out, not with words, but with presence. His steps were deliberate, audible, human. Then silence. No one answered. He stepped closer. The door flap hung limp, one of the ties fluttering loose. He lifted it. The interior was shadowed, but his eyes adjusted quickly. What he saw stopped him cold. The mother was there barely. Her body lay curled around two of the children, her arms tight, her face hollowed out with sickness and fatigue. Her lips were cracked, her skin pale beneath the grime. She did not stir when he entered. The children, pressed against her side, looked up with eyes that were wide, unfocused, too tired to cry. He dropped to his knees and reached into his coat, pulling out the last of the dried meat he had brought with him. He broke it into pieces, soaked them with water, and offered them without speaking. One child took it cautiously, like a creature used to being struck before fed. The others didn't move. He worked slowly, feeding, pouring drops of water, arranging the blankets into tighter corners. He didn't know her name. Didn't know theirs. But names weren't what mattered now. Warmth did. Food. Safety. He wrapped the weakest child in his own coat and cradled them close while he kindled a small fire outside the wagon's mouth, blocking the wind with a canvas sheet he'd taken from the barn. The smoke rose thin, trailing up into the brittle sky. Hours passed like that, quiet, broken only by coughing, the soft clatter of kindling, the occasional clink of a spoon on tin. She stirred once. Not fully awake. Her hand moved across the blanket, searching. When it found a smaller one of her children, her fingers curled gently. Then she slept again. That night, he didn't go back inside his own house. He laid a bedroll near the fire, wrapped himself in 2 thick woolen throws, and faced the wagon with his back to the cold. The stars pressed down like stones. Coyotes sang in the distance, but none came close. He didn't sleep. Not entirely. He waited. Listened. When morning came, the wind had quieted. The cold remained, but the sharpness had dulled. He rose and built another fire. Heated broth. Stewed oats. When he brought the food inside the wagon, one of the children, barely more than 4, reached for it with both hands. He helped feed them one by one. Gently. Without rush. Without question. The mother opened her eyes just once that day. Not wide. Not with strength. But enough. She looked at him. Not with fear. Not with gratitude, even. Just recognition. As if she had finally seen someone who wouldn't leave. She closed her eyes again, her hands still curled around her child's back. By dusk, he had reinforced the wagon's seams with canvas, plugged the cracks with fabric, and tied a second tarp over the top to trap warmth. He didn't try to speak. They didn't need words. Everything said now would have to be in action. As night fell again, he lit 2 lanterns and set them on each side of the fire. The light bounced off the wagon's walls and sent flickering shadows up the trees. He stayed close again, carving wood, his knife moving slowly. A figure began to take shape, around cheeks, small shoulders, tucked hands. He would not name it. Not yet. He just carved. The first true thaw came slowly. It wasn't marked by a sudden burst of green or the rising song of birds, but by smaller things, the way the wind softened around the porch beams, the way the ground no longer crunched under boots at dawn, the way the frost lines on the wagon's canvas disappeared before noon. The man noticed each shift without comment, just as he noticed how the mother inside the wagon now sat up a little longer each day, her back resting against the frame, her face turned toward the light as though trying to recall the world beyond wood and wind. The children emerged more often now. Not all at once, not boldly, but with growing steadiness. They circled the yard like whispers, running from one shadow to another, their small bare feet learning again the rhythm of the earth beneath them. Sometimes they followed him to the shed and stood in the doorway, watching with solemn eyes as he repaired bridles or split kindling. They said nothing, but their presence spoke loud enough. One day, the youngest left a bundle of feathers on the porch, bound together with a thread of red yarn. It was placed carefully, centered like an offering. By then, they were no longer afraid of the dog. A mongrel he'd raised from a pup, the dog had always been wary of strangers, but it had adjusted in its own time, circling the wagon slowly before settling at its base like a sentinel. Now, one of the older children sometimes rested a hand on its back, and though the animal stiffened at first, it did not move away. It seemed they had reached an agreement, survival earned not through force, but quiet patience. The mother, too, changed. Her movements grew firmer, her gaze steadier. She had not yet spoken to him. Not aloud. But once, when she emerged at dusk to gather water from the barrel, she looked at him fully, not with hesitation but with something deeper. A shared weight. The kind of understanding born only through hardship. He had built them a shed. Nothing fancy, for walls, a roof, a door that didn't quite sit square, but it was shelter beyond wheels and fabric. Inside, he laid down fresh straw, a few wool blankets, and hung a lantern from the center beam. It was not a home, not yet, but it was a beginning. On the day they moved into it, the children helped carry what little they had, folded clothes, a tin pot, a carved bird he'd left at the wagon's door the week before. That evening, they lit a fire outside and sat in a circle, not quite together but not apart. He cooked beans and corn over the flame and passed the tin plates down the line. One child, braver than the others, offered a smile as she took her portion. It was crooked, hesitant, and full of missing teeth, but he returned it with a quiet nod, something like warmth catching in his throat. They didn't say grace. No one spoke. But there was something sacred in the silence that wrapped around them all. He had never asked where they came from. Not once. The land was full of broken stories. Lost names. People who ran and hid and kept moving to stay ahead of the pain. He didn't need their past to know their present. He only needed to keep showing up, one bucket of water, one loaf of bread, one hammer strike at a time. Weeks passed. The snow became memory. The earth softened. Flowers appeared in the corners of the yard where no one had thought to plant them. The youngest brought him a clump of them one morning, crushed but bright, and tucked them into the rim of his hat when he crouched to fix the well lever. He let them stay there all day. And then, one morning, it happened. The mother stepped onto the porch, not in hiding, not in haste, and placed a wrapped bundle on the step. Inside was food. Biscuits, a piece of cured meat, something resembling a sweet. He picked it up slowly, unwrapped it just enough to see what it was, then looked up. She was standing at the edge of the yard. She raised one hand just briefly. Not a wave. Not a farewell. Just acknowledgement. He nodded. From that day on, she worked beside him. Not always in silence, the words remained scarce. She helped mend fence posts, showed the older children how to patch clothing, gathered eggs with the precision of someone who knew hunger too well. They moved as two separate rhythms that slowly learned how to sync. There was no moment of triumph. No sweeping embrace. Only the steady layering of life, day after day, like boards laid across a frame. And then came the knock. He heard it just before sunset, 2 slow raps on the side of the gate, not the front door. When he opened it, a man stood there, dust-covered, hat in hand. Behind him, 5 more. Weather-worn. Quiet-eyed. And behind them, the rest. Dozens. Men on horseback, women with baskets, elders leaning on staffs, young boys carrying tools. A people moving not in protest or battle, but in return. In thanks. They had come for her. Not to take her away, but to stand behind her. Because someone had seen them when no one else would. The man stepped aside without a word and let the wind carry the sound of hooves and footsteps into his yard. The sun dropped low and shadows stretched long. And for the first time in years, the ranch no longer felt like a place of silence. It felt like home.